Hey everybody, welcome to the Leek. I'm John as always, and it's that time again. It is set review time for Theros Beyond Death. We're going to be taking a look at all of the white cards today from a limited perspective. Now, before we jump on into these card ratings, let me talk a little bit about the set review itself. There's a few disclaimers. First up, this is a limited set review only. I am not going to be discussing Commander, Brawl, Pioneer, Modern, Canlander, Tiny Leaders, anything like that. Limited only, specifically focused on Draft. As a little bit of a caveat to that, I am not talking about Arena. Arena Draft doesn't exist. I am talking about the real world. I'm talking about MTGO and paper. Some of this may be applicable to Arena. It will depend on how absolutely stupid the bots are. Second disclaimer, I've not played with most of these cards. Some of them are reprints, and I have played with, but I haven't played with most of them. These are how I'm going to be approaching these cards week 1, week 2, until my opinions become more formed on the cards. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel so you can watch my Pack 1 Pick 1s, my Spiky Saturdays where I draft every week. Go check me out on twitch.tv/TheManaLeak where you'll see me draft every Wednesday. My opinions will evolve as the set evolves. Final disclaimer, these of course are my opinions. I might play things a little bit differently than you. I might evaluate things a little bit differently than you. The point of set reviews is not to tell you the correct thing. Nobody knows the correct rating for these cards. The best pros don't know the correct ratings for these cards. You should be taking this as one part of your limited prep. There are other people you should listen to. You should, most importantly, think about these cards yourself and talk to me, talk to each other in the comments down below about them. But let's get started. Up first is Alseid of Life's Bounty. Alseid of Life's Bounty is a single white mana for an enchantment creature nymph at uncommon. It's a 1/1 with lifelink. Pay 1, sacrifice it. Target creature or enchantment you control gains protection from the color of your choice until end of turn. It's a 1/1 lifelinker on the ground. I'm not a big fan of that. 1/1s for 1 need to surprise me. They need to be amazing. And this one isn't really. It pretends to be Mother of Runes, but it only gets to give that protection a single time, and your opponent is well aware that it's coming. So this is, okay-ish. It'll help turn on Constellation, and that's really the only deck that I'd want to play this in would be green-white Constellation. Beyond that, I think this card's really a D+. I think it's going to get overplayed. I don't think it's worth playing in possibly the vast majority of decks. D+ for Alseid of Life's Bounty. Up next is Archon of Falling Stars. Archon of Falling Stars is 4 white for a creature Archon at uncommon. It's a 4/4 flyer. When Archon of Falling Stars dies, you may return target enchantment card from your graveyard to the battlefield. It seems fine enough. It's a 4/4 flyer for 6, which isn't exactly ideal, but is still playable. And if the format isn't blisteringly fast, stay tuned for my prediction on that. This card is totally okay. Whether you get value off of this seems a little bit semi-iffy, and boy will it suck if you could return an aura and this was your only creature and therefore you can't return it. But of course this is the Enchantment Matters set. There are auras, there are enchantments, there are enchantment creatures, so you're typically going to be able to hit something with this, especially if you're pairing white with green, and even white itself has a whole bunch of different enchantments within it. So since you should generally always be getting value off of this, and since it's a generally totally fine creature, it is, I think, a pretty darn solid C+. And of course, if you are definitely flush with enchantments, it's going to go up to B-. So C+, B- for Archon of Falling Stars. Up next is Archon of Sun's Grace. Archon of Sun's Grace is 2 white for a creature Archon at rare. It's a 3/4 flying lifelink. Pegasus creatures you control have lifelink. Constellation, that's right, Constellation is back, which is a reminder word. It's not a mechanic exactly. It's just reminding you that this is going to trigger whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control. So, Constellation, whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, create a 2/2 white Pegasus creature token with flying. And of course, as long as this is still around, it also has lifelink. This card just seems great. It's a 3/4 lifelink flyer for 4, which is 100% playable and highly pickable by itself. The fact that it pops out 2/2 lifelink flyers every time you drop an enchantment is great. Between enchantment creatures and auras and enchantments, there's a build-up around plan right there. This card seems like an easy A, assuming that you do have those enchantments, and if you're white, you're going to have a good start. Pair this with green and you're going to be super happy. And of course, most of the colors have a good number of enchantments in them, although green-white does appear to be the heaviest of those color pairs. If you do happen to be a little bit sparse on enchantments, this drops to like a B, but you're still generally first picking this. Solid A for Archon of Sun's Grace. Up next is Banishing Light. Banishing Light is 2 and a white for an enchantment at uncommon. When Banishing Light enters the battlefield, exile target non-land permanent an opponent controls until Banishing Light leaves the battlefield. This is a reprint. We've had this a few times. It's a great card. It's a fixed version of Oblivion Ring, which had this entire trigger split into 2 sentences, so there were weird things that could happen, and this kind of fixed that. This card is just pretty darn premium removal in white. Now, there is some extra enchantment hate kicking around in this format. It's going to be main decked, so it goes down ever so slightly, but don't get too hung up on that. People will frequently look, especially at the white removal, pacifism, trapped in the tower, etc., and say, well, you know, there's this common card that kills it, so it's bad and I'm not going to play it. And that is wrong. That is you trying to be way too clever. Sure, there is a common card that kills it, but you know what? There's a common card that kills almost anything. There's common cards that kill Archon of Sun's Grace. You still should be first picking it, and it's still going to be amazing 90% of the time. Banishing Light is still going to be great. It's still going to be the first pick in most of the packs that you see this in. The only thing that's going to go over this would be much more unconditional removal or straight up bombs. Banishing Light gets a solid B+. Up next is the Birth of Meletis. The Birth of Meletis is 1 and a white for an enchantment, Saga at uncommon. Sagas are back from Dominaria. Sagas, if you haven't seen them before, are enchantments. When they enter the battlefield and after each of your draw steps, which is a weird place, it's not in your main phase, it's not in your upkeep step, it's not at the start of your draw step, it's after the draw step. You put a lore counter on the Saga, and it triggers whatever act it just moved into. So Act 1 of the Birth of Meletis is search your library for a basic Plains card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Act 2, create an 0/4 colorless wall artifact creature token with Defender. Act 3, you gain 2 life. So Act 1 happens immediately, Act 2 is your next turn, Act 3 is your second turn after that. This card just seems really mediocre. You get an 0/4 that draws you a Plains and gains you 2 life, but it takes you 2 turns to do all of that. If you're a super duper defensive deck, maybe, but yeah, this just feels really weak, especially since the wall doesn't even provide devotion or anything. Not that devotion's actually a huge mechanic in this format. We'll talk about that later. This is not a wall of omens, as I have seen some people suggest, because drawing a card, a random card, is a million times better than 100% of the time drawing a Plains. I have this card at a D. I really, really don't like it. I honestly can't imagine the draft where you are the green-white Constellation deck and you somehow are so desperate for enchantments that you're going to play this. Captivating Unicorn is up next. Captivating Unicorn is 4 and a white for a 4/4 creature unicorn at common with Constellation. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, tap target creature an opponent controls. This seems fine if a little expensive, but it's a 4/4, so I guess it can't be too much cheaper. But if you are Constellation heavy, this could be a decent curve topper. You put this down as a 4/4, next turn you play an enchantment, you tap a creature, you get to attack in, hopefully with your 4/4 and your other stuff as well. This seems like probably a totally fine card. It's not going to be top 3 white commons. It might break top 5, it might not quite be top 5 though, but I think it is a very good card, assuming that you are going to be triggering Constellation, at least semi-reliably. So I have this at like a C+. I don't think it's going to creep into the B- range, but I think it is just totally fine. Up next is Commanding Presence. Commanding Presence is 3 and a white for an enchantment aura at uncommon. Enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +2/+2 and has first strike. And whenever this creature deals combat damage to a player, create a 1/1 white human soldier creature token. 4 mana is a lot for this to not immediately replace itself. +2/+2 and first strike is nice and makes a pretty terrifying creature, but getting a 1/1 if you damage an opponent just seems so piddly. Your opponent should be dead in only a couple of hits, so what difference does that 1/1 or that 2/1/1s make? It's not my favorite, but it'll trigger Constellation. It will make the creature scary for a little bit if it doesn't get removed, so it's probably fine enough in many decks at like the C level. I think it's better than, if we're going to go back to Eldraine, Tall as a Beanstalk, but I don't know that it's too much better than that. It's definitely a pale impression of some previous really good auras that we've seen, typically those that make the creature immediately when you play the aura. Up next is Dawn Evangel. Dawn Evangel is 2 and a white for an enchantment creature human cleric at uncommon. It's a 2/3. Whenever a creature dies, if an aura you controlled was attached to it, return target creature card with converted mana cost 2 or less from your graveyard to your hand. This reads a lot better than I think it is. It's a 2/3 for 3, which is, filler. It's fine. You can play it if you need a body. Those stats alone are like a C-. You don't want to play it, but you will. The ability is pretty narrow. You need to have had a creature with an aura, or an opponent sacking something that you put an aura on, I guess, which is a cute kind of corner case. And then you need to have a creature with CMC 2 or less in your graveyard, and it only goes to your hand, not the battlefield. And how late in the game is that 2 or 1 drop going to be impactful? This just seems very mediocre. I think it's just a C-. I think it's a vanilla 2/3 or a 2/3 that will give you quote unquote value, but the value is not that good. So it's like a C-. If you want to get real optimistic, I think the ceiling is like a C. Up next is Daxos Blessed by the Sun. Daxos Blessed by the Sun is white for a legendary enchantment creature demigod at uncommon. He's a 2-star. Daxos' toughness is equal to your devotion to white, which is the number of white mana symbols that you have in casting costs of permanents on the battlefield. Whenever another creature you control enters the battlefield or dies, you gain 1 life. It's the first day of set reviews. Let's talk briefly about devotion. Devotion's not really kicking around that much in this set. And in fact, I went back and I looked at Theros, and devotion wasn't kicking around in Theros that much. I think we all have some weird memory of Theros being this devotion set. But there's a very tiny number of commons that care about devotion. There's an okay number of uncommons that care about it, but devotion's really this ability that's locked into the gods, which are mythic. And these demigods, which do get better with devotion for sure, but aren't by any means amazing with their devotion ability. So I would be careful about evaluating any card based on the fact that, well, it sits on the battlefield and has devotion and therefore it's better. But with that aside said, Daxos seems totally fine. He's a 2/2 for 2 at an absolute minimum because he has 2 devotion himself. And then gaining a life every single time you play a creature or a creature of yours dies is a cool little bonus. 1 life isn't a big deal, but 1 life here or there is still not a big deal, but is nice little bonus. So Daxos is totally playable. He's an enchantment, which I think matters much more than any sort of counting of devotion pips matter. And so I think ultimately is like a very, very, very strong C+. I don't think he gets into the B range just because whether he's a 2/4 or a 2/12, it doesn't really make that much of a difference. I definitely prefer the demigods that grow their power more than their toughness. But a very strong C+ for Daxos Blessed by the Sun. Up next is Daybreak Chimera. Daybreak Chimera is 3 white for a creature chimera at common. It's a 3/3. This spell costs X less to cast, where X is your devotion to white, and it flies. If you're paying 5 for this, you're not actually too sad. You're mildly sad, but you're not too sad if you pay 3 white for this. If you pay 2 white for this, it's a totally okay creature. Like a C, not even a C+. But if you can knock this down to 1 white, or even better, white, then this card's actually just totally okay. This is, I guess, one of the common devotion payoffs is you get a 3/3 flyer for a little bit cheaper than normal, which is fine. I'm not bad-mouthing it, but it's not exciting exactly. But I think this card probably tops out at a C+. We're not going to go into the B range with this, but I think the fact that even if you cast it for 5, it's not like you're so far behind. This card's like a C- if it was literally just a 3/3 flyer for 5. So C+ for Daybreak Chimera. Up next is Dreadful Apathy. Dreadful Apathy is 2 and a white for an enchantment aura at common. Enchanted creature can't attack or block. Pay 2 and a white, exile enchanted creature. Much like Banishing Light, this card will be fine. Yes, there's enchantment removal, yada yada, but not only does your opponent have to have it and use it, you can actually deny them the chance to use it by having the mana up to exile this creature instead. This is quite possibly the best white common in the set, and in some packs this will be the first pick. This card just looks fantastic. The only reason that Banishing Light is probably still better than this is that it takes it off the battlefield, so no triggered abilities, no activated abilities, etc. Dreadful Apathy, Daxos can still be gaining you 1 life a turn even though he has Dreadful Apathy. So B+ for Dreadful Apathy. Up next is On Of Obstruction. On Of Obstruction is 1 and a white for an enchantment creature spirit at rare. It's a 2/1 first strike. Loyalty abilities of planeswalkers your opponents control cost 1 more to activate. It's a 2/1 first striker for 2. which is fine. It's definitely not the rare that you want to see in your pack, but a 2/1 First Striker is an okay card. The times that this will have extra value will be in the ones of times and potentially zeros of times for you, depending on how often you draft this format. You would need to be drafting this format daily for this to actually have full value for you, 10 times. But it's still a fine creature. We know that, from Youthful Knight. This is just a Youthful Knight. It's a very mid-pack card. It's like a C. It might creep into the C+ range, but I don't really think so. So it's just a C. And if you do get to actually tax a Planeswalker, cool, great, you did it. Just don't expect to ever actually do that. Up next is Elspeth Conquers Death. Elspeth Conquers Death is 3 white for an enchantment saga at rare. Act 1, exile target permanent an opponent controls with converted mana cost 3 or greater. Act 2, non-creature spells your opponents cast cost 2 more to cast until your next turn. Act 3, return target creature or planeswalker card from your graveyard to the battlefield. Put a +1/+1 counter on it or a loyalty counter on it. Your choice. Probably going to choose +1/+1 for a creature, probably going to choose loyalty counter for the planeswalker. You could go the other way if you want. I don't recommend it. I'm not super sold on this. It's probably just fine as a 5-mana kill a big thing, or at least an expensive thing. So it's probably a floor of like a B-, but the second stage of this is extremely meaningless. And then you need to have something to return to make the third stage worth it. You typically will by turn 6 or turn 7 in a game of Magic, especially in Limited. But the graveyards don't fill up quite as fast as you think they do. Now, of course, in this set, if you're blue or black, or to a lesser extent green, they will fill up a little bit faster than you think they do. But a lot of people, I think that, turn 7, there are 10 cards in the graveyard in a game of Limited Magic, and that's just not even remotely the average. So yeah, something about this saga just makes me go, meh. It's probably just how weak the middle stage is. The first stage is still just removal for an expensive thing. But I just worry about how much this kind of requires the perfect storm of there's a 3+ CMC creature I want to kill, and then in 2 turns I've got a creature that I want to return. To, push the B+ range or even the A range. I think as it stands, this is like a B-. It's just expensive removal. But if you do have the ability to return something that's actually pretty impactful, this probably creeps up to the B range. So I'm going to start at a B-. I recognize that that's probably a little bit underrating, but I think people are going to overrate this as well. This is certainly not the Eldest Reborn. Up next is our first planeswalker of the set, Elspeth Sun's Nemesis. Elspeth Sun's Nemesis is kind of hard to say. 2 white for legendary planeswalker Elspeth at Mythic. She starts with 5 loyalty. She has no plus abilities. She has -1, up to 2 target creatures you control each get +2/+1 until end of turn. -2, create 2 1/1 white human soldier creature tokens. -3, you gain 5 life. She can also escape. This is a mechanic for Theros Beyond Death. Escape 4 white and exile 4 other cards from your graveyard. What this does is let you cast the spell from your graveyard, so long as you pay that escape cost, which is the mana cost, plus exiling the other cards. Now, I said we wouldn't talk about Arena, and this will probably also be an issue on MTGO, but man, is it annoying where Elspeth appears kind of beside your hand on Arena, and your graveyard says that you have 4 cards, but one of them is Elspeth, and so you try to cast her and you can't, and it's annoying. But anyways, Elspeth might not seem great. I know people have been down on her for sure, probably for constructed reasons. And don't get me wrong, she's no Oko, but she's still pretty strong. Playing sort of like a weaker History of Benalia is A-okay. And if you can return her once, I think you've gotten a ton of value out of her. And if those creatures aren't what you needed, odds are you need or want the 5 life. I think she's a first pick. I don't think she's a crazy bomb planeswalker. I'm not going to put her in the A range, but I think she is a solid B+. Speaking briefly about Escape, I am slightly concerned about it for Limited. Looking at Elspeth, we're talking about exiling 4 cards plus casting her. That's 5 cards. That's 12.5% of your entire Limited deck. Another chunk of your deck is going to be in your hand. Another chunk of your deck is going to be on the battlefield in the form of lands or permanents that are probably just not going to go to the battlefield. I'm talking mana rocks and stuff like that. So I think that in a lot of decks, you're probably escaping things once, maybe twice. There are definitely some cheaper escape cards out there in terms of number of cards that they cost, but there's also some really expensive ones. There are some Exile 5 card escapers, and I think those you're escaping one time in most drafts. There are some self-mill archetypes that we'll see later, especially in blue and black, and to a lesser extent green. But yeah, I think escape might actually be interesting because you are going to have to kind of pick and choose what you escape, because you're not going to get to do it often. But if you get to escape Elspeth, that's going to be some serious value. Next up is Favorite of Iroas, as people had told me in the comments. However, I learned that Iroas is a Greek word for hero, spelled Iroas. So I actually think that my pronunciation of Iroas is closer than Iroas. Anyways, Favored by the Red-White God is 2 and a white for a creature human soldier at uncommon. It's a 2/2, it's got Constellation. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, Favored of Iroas gains double strike until end of turn. I'm not a huge fan of this card until I know that I'm triggering it frequently, especially with auras on itself. If you're not triggering this nearly every single turn, it's just super overcosted and weak. And the fewer times that you can reliably trigger it in a game, the more often it'll just get chumped when it was effective. And then the double strike goes away because it's only there till end of turn. This will depend entirely on how good the aura constellation white based decks are, but I'm hesitant starting this at anything more than a C+. I think people are going to jump this right up into the B range and take it and think that, aha, it's going to be a double striker every time, and I'm going to put 4 auras on it and it's going to be great, and then it's going to get removed and they're going to feel sad. There is removal in this set. Yes, there's a lot of auras. Yes, there's a lot of value to playing those auras. There is removal. If you load up on this one creature, you will get blown out. So I'm going to start this at a C+. Personally, I'm probably going to shy away from playing it at the start until I see that it's actually something that's just double strike every single turn. If it's not that, I'm a little bit too hesitant on this card. C+ for Favored of Iroas. Up next is Flicker of Fate. Flicker of Fate is 1 and a white for an instant at common. Exile target creature or enchantment, then return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. It's Cloud Shift, except it can also hit enchantments, and it costs 2 instead of 1. It's nifty if you have ETB effects that you want to trigger. This is definitely the way to do it. As well, this lets you move auras around, which is kind of cool. You bounce the aura, and whenever an aura ETBs without you having cast it, you actually just choose what to attach it to. Exactly how playable is this? I think it'll be entirely deck dependent. If you have lots of enchantments to move around, give it a try. Lots of ETB effects, give it a go. But no, then you probably don't want to play it at all. It is kind of cute in combat. Your opponent uses a combat trick, or they try to use removal, and you go, haha, I flicker, and your removal is countered. It's a counterspell in white sometimes. But it is hard to exactly grade since it is pretty deck dependent. I think the average is going to average out to like a C. I think some decks it'll push up to a C+, and some decks it'll drop down to a C-. So C-, C+, C+ for Flicker of Fate. Up next is Glorybearers. Glorybearers is 3 and a white for an enchantment creature human cleric at common. It's a 3/4. Whenever another creature you control attacks, it gets +0/+1 until end of turn. So a 3/4 for 4 is, it's not great, it's not awful. It's an enchantment creature if you want to trigger Constellation, and you're definitely going to want to be doing that in white. And it makes your creatures survive perhaps a little bit better than they might otherwise. This is probably totally fine in an aggro deck as one of your, not top end, but top-ish ends, because it is going to help your creatures survive just a little bit better. This is infinitely better than Fortifying Provisions that we saw in Throne of Eldraine, because this comes with a 3/4 body, as opposed to just being an enchantment that sits there and gives you a food. So I think this is probably a pretty fine C+ if your plan is to be attacking. If you're not attacking, I'm not quite sure why you're playing white or what deck you're playing. But if you're not, this does drop down to like a C or a C-, but C+ if you're going to be swinging into the red zone. Up next is Hilliards Suncrowned. Hilliards Suncrowned is 2 and a white for a legendary enchantment creature god at Mythic. He's a 5/5 indestructible. As long as your devotion to white is less than 5, Hilliard is not a creature. Whenever you gain life, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature or enchantment you control. Pay 1 and a white, another target creature gains lifelink until end of turn. Why would you want to put a +1/+1 counter on an enchantment? Well, you put it on Hilliard, so then he's a 6/6, even if he's not a creature yet, so that when he is a creature, he's a 6/6 or a 7/7, etc. But Helia just seems really, really good. It's a potential 5/5 indestructible for 3, which is obviously great. Gaining life is a theme in white, so hopefully you can start throwing counters around even without activating the ability here. But be aware of a few things. Most of you will obviously know this, but a simple magic rule, lifelink from multiple creatures is still only one instance of gaining life. It doesn't matter if I hit you with 1 lifelinker or 5 lifelinkers, I gain life 1 time. So that is only 1 counter. As well, be aware that Heliod cannot give himself lifelink because it does say another creature, but he can put a counter on himself, even if he's not a creature yet. He seems very powerful, seems like an easy first pick. It seems, semi-easy to get Devotion of 5 in white. You have a whole bunch of white permanent cards. You have a whole bunch of auras and stuff like that might be a little bit harder to hit. This card is just a slam dunk A+ first pick. You're never ever not first picking this out of a pack. A+ for Heliod Suncrowned. Up next is Hilliards Intervention. Hilliards Intervention is X white for an instant at rare. Destroy X target artifacts and or enchantments, or target player gains twice X life. This is the intervention cycle. There's one for each god. It's either an X effect or a twice X effect. And with a lot of them, you typically want to cast one side, like 99% of the time, maybe 90% of the time. And this one's no different. This probably kills something, maybe multiple somethings, thanks to enchantment creatures and such kicking around. And so this is main deckable. That said, don't overestimate how many enchantment creatures there are. There are a number of them. They are, however, a little bit locked up at uncommon. So what's kind of weird is even though I'm going to tell you throughout all these set reviews to main deck your enchantment hate, I think people are going to overestimate just how many enchantment creatures they're going to see in a game. You're going to see them. It's just not the case that you're, definitely going to see like 7 of them in every deck. So I will say dial back your plans of Heliod's Invention, wiping your opponent's board. Odds are it's going to kill an enchantment creature and, kill an aura over here and maybe an enchantment over here. Maybe an artifact for good measure. It's still good. Don't get me wrong. I think it's still removal. It's just a little bit conditional. Now, the other half of this card, you just never want to cast it. You never want to put any mana into gaining twice X life. If it saves you, congrats. You played the 1 out of 99 times that it was actually relevant to do that. You're playing this card to play the first side, and I think you're still main decking it, just like all of the other enchantment hate that we'll talk about in this set review. But I do think that this is like a B-. I think people are going to overrate it. I think people are going to, people are going to expect that this is the enchantment set and they're everywhere and they're all impactful. And that's not true. The card's not bad. I just think it's going to be overrated. B- for Heliod's Intervention. Up next is Hilliards Pilgrim. Hilliards Pilgrim is 2 and a white for a creature human cleric. At common, it's a 1/2. When Hilliard's Pilgrim enters the battlefield, you may search your library for an aura card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. It's totally fine if you have at least a few auras. If you're just, packing 1 bomb aura, you don't really want to play this card, because what if you draw the aura first? You're going to play a 3-mana 1/2? That's going to be pretty bad. You have to be hitting something 100% of the time to cast this card. If you are, which in some number of white decks you will be, this is like a C+, a totally okay C+. We've actually seen this card in Ultimate Masters and originally in M2015, and it was fine. It was totally fine. In Ultimate Masters, it was grabbing Umbras and crazy stuff, like Eldrazi Conscription. And in M15, I don't remember what it was grabbing, but it was grabbing things that were okay. So as long as you have things, emphasis on the plural there, this is a C+. If you don't play this card. It's an F. So F, C+, depends on your deck. Up next is Heliod's Punishment. Heliod's Punishment is 1 and a white for an enchantment aura at uncommon. Heliod's Punishment enters the battlefield with 4 task counters on it. Enchanted creature can't attack or block. It loses all abilities and has tap, remove a task counter from Heliod's Punishment. Then, if it has no task counters on it, destroy Heliod's Punishment. So it's sort of like a rest. It removes all of the abilities instead of saying that it can't activate the abilities, which is nice because it means the triggered abilities go away as well, which a rest does not get. However, your opponent's going to have their creature back in full in probably 3 turns. If the creature was tapped when you play this, then 4 turns. Or if it had summoning sickness, I suppose. But, that's still pretty okay. Limited games of Magic on average don't go 20 turns. Sure, I've played plenty of 20-turn games of limited Magic, but typical limited games, even in the slowest sets, end on average on like turn 8. So as long as you're not playing this card on turn 2 or 3 or 4, this may very well just last straight through to the end of the game. Now, because games do sometimes go long and you may be forced to use this a little bit early, I'm not going to give this a huge grade. I'm going to give this a B-. I think it's solid removal. I think people might even underestimate it a little bit as they overestimate how long the average limited game goes, but I think it's a solid B-. B- for Hilliards Punishment. Up next is Hero of the Pride. Hero of the Pride is 1 and a white for a creature cat soldier at common. It's a 2/2. Whenever you cast a spell that targets Hero of the Pride, creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. This is heroic from the original Theros, which was whenever you target a creature, something happens. In this set, it's not called heroic, and it always gives +1/+0. There's a bunch of creatures that do this exact ability, and this is the first one. So it's a bear, sure, that's playable enough, although these days bears are getting a little bit outclassed. And if you can heroic it, pumping your team is nice. It's definitely kind of an all-in aggro card, and in that deck, it's probably totally serviceable as like a C, maybe even a C+ in that specific deck. But if your plan isn't to smash hard and fast, this is around a C-. You can play it if you need a creature, but try to find some better stuff. So C-, C for Hero of the Pride. Up next is Hero of the Winds. Hero of the Winds is 3 and a white for a creature human soldier. It's not a bird. It looks like a bird. It looks like a griffin, but it's a human soldier at uncommon. It's a 1/4 flyer, and whenever you cast a spell that targets Hero of the Winds, creatures you control get +1/+0 until end of turn. It's what we just talked about. This card's probably slightly better because a 1/4 flyer can get in for damage, and if you do target it, it's a 2/4 flyer along with the rest of your team getting +1/+0. It can also block really well, which your 2/2 on the ground can't do. So I think this is a totally serviceable card. But again, it's definitely the aggro plan. You're definitely wanting to be aggro if you're playing this deck. And preview, especially for the red set review in a few days, I think this set might have some very serious aggro in it. I think there's a chance that the memories we have of Theros might be dead of it being, a glacially slow format where one creature became a 12/13 and on turn 17 we started attacking. I think there might be a lot of aggro in this set. And if there is, this is certainly going to help out. I think it's a pretty solid C+ if you're on that aggro plan. If you're not, it's going to drop more to like the C- range. C+, C- for Hero of the Winds. Up next is Idyllic Tudor. Idyllic Tudor is 2 and a white for a sorcery at rare. Search your library for an enchantment card, reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. Tutors are just never my favorite in Limited. There's often 1 or 2 cards that you're happy getting and you might have already drawn them before you draw this. They're often sorcery speed, meaning that you have to put all of your mana into tutoring, which means that you don't have it for casting that awesome thing that you just grabbed. So Idyllic Tutor will be the same. You need to have multiple great things to grab with this or else I'm just not interested. 1 thing, there's 0 chance I'm playing this. 2 is still pretty darn close to 0. 3 bomb enchantments, maybe, but still tutors just aren't good in non-cube limited most of the time. I've got this at a D-. I don't want to play it. If I have a god, maybe, but this still just sucks when you draw the god first and then you draw this. So D- for Idyllic Tutor. Up next is Indomitable Will. Indomitable Will is 1 and a white for an enchantment aura at common. It's got flash, enchant creature. Enchanted creature gets +1/+2. It's a combat trick that puts counters on your creature. Kind of. That's a good way to think about this, and it's technically worse because your opponent could destroy this enchantment, whereas they can't destroy the counters, but it's so weak that nobody's going to use removal on this aura unless it's like an absolute do or die moment. Nothing much more than a fine combat trick, though, but it does trigger Constellation, which is cute. It helps White Devotion, but as I talked about, I don't think helping White Devotion is something that you're actually going deep on. But being a totally serviceable combat trick that triggers Constellation, it's like a C. It's a fine C. Some decks, it might even creep up to like a C+, but C is where I think I'm gonna land on Indomitable Will. Next up is Karameros Blessing. Karameros Blessing is a single white mana for an instant at common. Target creature gets +2/+2 until end of turn. If it's an enchanted creature or an enchantment creature, it also gains hexproof and indestructible until end of turn. It's a mini giant growth, and maybe it's also counter your removal if it is enchanted or an enchantment. It reminds me of Ranger's Guile, but since it's not always Ranger's Guile, I don't like it quite as much. Around like the C- range. If you are definitely in the Aura's enchantment creatures deck, then it's like a C, but C is definitely the ceiling here. So ceiling of a C, many decks C- for Karameros Blessing. Up next is Lagana Band Storyteller. Lagana Band Storyteller is 3 and a white for a creature Centaur Advisor at uncommon. It's a 3/4. When Lagana Band Storyteller enters the battlefield, you may put target enchantment card from your graveyard on top of your library. If you do, you gain life equal to its converted mana cost. It's fine enough, but you definitely want to be returning something off of this. If you're playing a 3/4 for 4 that does nothing, it's mediocre. It's like a very C- card. You know, cut it, don't play it as long as you possibly can. If you desperately need a creature, sure. But you're in white, you're in Theros, there's a pretty decent chance you're returning something off of this. But it is random, kind of, you know, game to game. It depends on what your opponent removed or what you milled, I guess. If you're playing, I don't know, white-black or white-blue, maybe you mill a little bit there. So this card isn't going to go super high for me just because I really dislike these cards where I'm not, you know, 100% certain I'm going to be returning something. So I'll max this out as a C+ in the enchantments deck. Maybe if you pulled my arm, you could talk me up to a B- if like every card you had was an enchantment or an aura or an enchantment creature. But on average, I think it's probably going to cap out at the C range. So C+ for Lagana Band Storyteller. If you have the nuts enchantment deck, you're just stock with them, sure, B-. You pulled my arm. Up next is Leonin of the Lost Pride. Leonin of the Lost Pride is 1 and a white for a creature cat warrior at common. It's a 3/1. When Leonin of the Lost Pride dies, exile target card from an opponent's graveyard. It's a blade. It's my favorite stat, so I'm already sold. I love 3/1s for 2. They attack really, really well. If your opponent stumbles, they attack amazingly. And then when they no longer can attack amazingly well, they can attack and trade, or they can block and trade. And then this one, when it dies, and that's the point. The point is to get in damage, and then these are supposed to die. I get to take a card from my opponent's graveyard, which maybe is their escape spell or a card that stops them from escaping. Awesome. Easy C. I will play it like a C+ for sure. But yeah, just a nice little aggressive creature, C+ for Leonin of the Lost Pride. Up next is Nyxborn Courser. Nyxborn Courser is 1 white for an enchantment creature Centaur Scout at common. It's a 2/4 with flavor text. So obviously the rules text here is that it's an enchantment creature and that it has white mana pips. But again, you're not really going deep on devotion. If you have Daxos, cool, he gets 2 bigger. If you have Heliod, well, you know, I might jam this in a deck just to ensure that Heliod's going to be turned on. But I think the real value here is that it is an enchantment, and white is definitely pretty heavy in Constellation. And if you're in the market for that, a 2/4 for 3 is fine. I'd probably prefer a 3/3 for 3, just give me a Centaur Courser, but I'll take a 2/4 as well. So if you are really caring about enchantments, I think this is probably like a strong C. I'm still not going to go up to C+ on it. And if you don't care about enchantments, well, it's a weak C. It's still a C regardless. It's a creature you can put in your deck. You're not going to feel embarrassed about putting this in your deck. So a C for Nyxborn Courser. Up next is Omen of the Sun. Omen of the Sun is 2 and a white for an enchantment at common. It's got flash. When Omen of the Sun enters the battlefield, create 2 1/1 white human soldier creature tokens, and you gain 2 life. Pay 2 and a white, sacrifice Omen of the Sun, scry 2. This is a cycle. They're all relatively cheap. They all have flash. They all do something, and they all can be sacrificed for 3 to scry 2. This card seems okay. It's a 3 mana Raise the Alarm, which isn't the best, but you know, you get Constellation trigger off of it, and in the future you get to scry 2, which is probably okay. I think this is a C+ at best, and I think it might be a little bit more C-ish if you're not really caring about the enchantment part of it. If you are, C+ for sure. If you aren't, a C. You can still play this totally fine. Up next is Phalanx Tactics. Phalanx Tactics is 1 and a white for an instant and uncommon. Target creature you control gets +2/+1 until end of turn. Each other creature you control gets +1/+1 until end of turn. This is obviously best friends with Hero of the Wind and Hero of the Pride and Hero of the Games and all of the heroic creatures that give +1/+0 to the team, because then this card is actually +2/+1 to your entire team, which is what we expect from this card. If you're in the go wide aggro deck, which is going to be red-white, and you have those heroes, this is going to be your typical +2/+1, better than Trumpet Blast card, and it's going to do exactly what you want it to do. If you're not in that deck, you don't play it. So this is, it's a big range from F to C+. I don't think it creeps into a B- even in that deck. As important as it is, you still can just win the games without it. But once you know you're in that deck, you're definitely going to be keeping an eye out for this. But yeah, it's a highly variable grade. It's highly deck dependent. It ranges from F to C+. So F to C+ for Phalanx Tactics. Up next is Pious Wayfarer. Pious Wayfarer is a single white mana for a creature human scout at common. It's a 1/2 with Constellation. Whenever an enchantment enters the battlefield under your control, target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn. This is pretty mediocre. The payoff just isn't good enough for me. There's a lot of payoffs for Constellation in white and green especially, and in some other colors for sure. I keep saying white-green, but there are other Constellation payoffs. They're just all better than this. They're all better than a 1/2 for 1. I don't want to play this card even in the Constellation deck. If I'm playing this card, it means that I really shouldn't have been drafting that deck because somebody else was cutting me. D for Pious Wayfarer. I think it's just deeply mediocre. Up next is Reverent Hoplite. Reverent Hoplite is 4 and a white for a creature human soldier at uncommon. It's a 1/2. When Reverent Hoplite enters the battlefield, create a number of 1/1 white human soldier creature tokens equal to your devotion to white. We found another devotion card. We're almost done the set review for today. And it's uncommon. And, spoiler, I don't think it's actually that good. This is a variation of Evangel of Heliod from the original Theros, which was this card, except it was 4 white, and it was a 1/3. Making it 1 mana cheaper and 1 toughness less still doesn't really interest me. Evangel of Heliod was not that great. Going wide with a bunch of 1/1s doesn't necessarily win you the game. It doesn't break a board stall. It doesn't present a defense. It basically wins you the game when you're already ahead. Obviously, it can be very good with Phalanx Tactics and, a Hero of the Games or a Hero of the Wind or whatever. But yeah, you have to build explicitly around this. And if you have built explicitly around it, it will work some of those times. Something that I do think some people miss with my set reviews is I'm talking about, drafting, a dozen, 2 dozen, 4 dozen, 100 times, 200 times. And what you should do on average, what you should do to make sure that your win rate is the highest on average. So I'm going to say I think this card is kind of like a D. I think it's only good in some certain situations. In some cases, this will be the thing that dominantly wins you the game that you wouldn't have won otherwise. But those times are going to be way rarer than the times where this just comes out and pops out 3 1/1s and you look at your opponent's 4/4 and kind of cry a little. So I'm just not sold on Reverent Hoplite. I don't think it's going to be that good. I'll put it to a D+ just because that's kind of my build around grade usually. Like when it's good, it's going to be good. So let's go for a D+ with Reverent Hoplite. But man, the times that you pay 5 mana or that your choices, you shouldn't do this. Your choices pay 5 mana to make a 1/2 and a 1/1. Oh, that's real bad. Up next is Revoke Existence. Revoke Existence is 1 and a white for a sorcery at common. Exile target artifact or enchantment. I'll happily main deck the first of these and maybe the second. We'll see. I did that in Born of the Gods and Scars of Mirrodin before that. There's enough valid targets for this that it'll just always be castable. The second copy I am slightly wary of just because some opponents may not have that many enchantments. Like I said, enchantment creatures are a mechanic in this set. They're not kicking around at the levels that you're going to see multiples of them every game. If your blue opponent's packing an enchantment creature that's a 1/2, sure, this technically has a target, but is it worth it? There's also not that many artifacts in this set at all, which I'm super happy about. I think artifacts are a weird thing for limited. Maybe we'll talk about that at some point. So I'd be cautious here. There are enough auras and non-creature enchantments kicking around, that this will have a target and it will usually be fine, at least the first one. It is sorcery speed though, which is kind of a pain, so I'm going to put this at like a C+. I think I'll always main deck the first one. I think enchantment hate will be overrated at first just because people are going to think that it is always removal. And the secret's going to be that it's only sometimes, maybe even often removal. But the question is going to be, is it worth it? Is killing a Daxos with this really super worth it? So my take for Revoke Existence is put the first one in the main deck. I think it's going to be a C+ for the first one. The second one, I think I'm going to start siding in rather than playing in the first deck. But we'll see how the format shapes out. I could be totally wrong. Maybe there's just enough common enchantment creatures that you'll get multiples of those and you'll always get one or two of the uncommons, and maybe there's just always enough. But I don't know that the numbers are lining up for that exactly just yet. Up next is Rumbling Sentry. Rumbling Sentry is 3 white for a creature giant. At common, it's a 3/6. When Rumbling Sentry enters the battlefield, scry 1. Not really a big fan of this one. It's a big dumb creature. Scrying 1 is a cool bonus, but I don't want to be paying 5 mana for that for a creature that doesn't attack amazingly and blocks okay, but creatures that block really well on like turn 5 and later aren't where you want them. You want those things early to keep you alive. You might just be dead by the time this comes down. So this just seems like a big dumb creature. It's like a D+. It's one of those creatures that not only should you cut reliably, you probably should never put into your main pile in the first place. So D+ for Rumbling Sentry. It has power and toughness, so if you're in a real bad spot, you can put it in, but don't. D for don't. Up next is Sentinels Eyes. Sentinels Eyes is a single white mana for an enchantment aura at common. Enchanted creature gets +1/+1 and has vigilance. Escape for a single white mana and exile 2 other cards from your graveyard. There are way better ways of enabling Constellation than playing this card. A single white mana for a +1/+1 counter and vigilance essentially is what this is just not a card that I want to be playing. There's way better ways of triggering Constellation. There's way better things to get your Devotion pips, and as I've mentioned, I don't think Devotion's a massive thing that you need to really play for in this set. It's just a thing that exists on a couple of cards. And I certainly don't want to be escaping this card. I want to be escaping better cards than this. I want to use my graveyard for that. This card just seems deeply mediocre. I think it probably borders on like a D-. It's not quite an F because if you're desperate to enable Constellation, sure, but there are just so many better ways. D- for this Sentinel and his special eyes. Up next is Shatter the Sky. Shatter the Sky is 2 white for a sorcery at rare. Each player who controls a creature with power 4 or greater draws a card, then destroy all creatures. It's 4 mana for a board wipe. We haven't seen that in a while, especially not 2 white. That's Wrath of God. That's Day of Judgment territory. And 4 mana is about the sweet spot for where I consider board wipes to be pretty decent in Limited. They're cheap enough that you don't have to wait till like turn 5 or 6 to actually activate that wrath, meaning that you're just going to be dead from not playing your creatures into it, because if you play your creatures into it, they're going to die too, or you have to play your creatures into it and then you don't have anything to play after it. So 4 mana is definitely a nice little sweet spot. If you also can asymmetrically draw the card and your opponent doesn't, even better. And if your opponent draws the card and you don't, fine, whatever, you're still wrathing the board. This is probably just a straight up B. I think people do overrate board wipes a little bit in Limited though. They're always way less impactful in game 2 and game 3 once your opponent knows they have them as well, so be careful about that. But I think Shatter the Sky is just a solid B. Sunmane Pegasus is up next. Sunmane Pegasus is 3 and a white for a creature Pegasus at common. It's 2/3 flyer. Pay 1 and a white. Sunmane Pegasus gains vigilance and lifelink until end of turn. This is fine, and if your plan is to definitely fly, then this is going to help you out for sure. 4 mana is a slight bit costly for a 2/3 flyer, and you do have to be setting aside 2 mana if you want to be getting that lifelink, and potentially the vigilance is important to you, although 3 toughness, that folds to a fair bit of creatures. So it's not like the vigilance is a must-have part of this card. It's probably just fine in some number of decks. I just don't quite know if it's going to jump up to the C+ range. I think it might just be a C. If you're going to be aggro, you're probably going to want to have not too many 4-drops, and this one is going to get through for some damage if they don't have a flying blocker or a reacher. But I think there's probably just a number of other cards you'd prefer over this. So I think just a C for Sunmane Pegasus. It's fine. It's not a card that you should, reliably cut or anything, but I don't think you're going out of your way to play this. Up next is Terran Iike, a Crowan Veteran. Terran Iike, a Crowan Veteran, is 1 white for a legendary creature human soldier at rare. She's a 3/3 with vigilance. When Terran Iike, a Crowan Veteran, attacks, untap another target creature you control. Doesn't have to be attacking, but it probably should be. Until end of turn, that creature has base power and toughness 4/4 and gains indestructible. This is definitely really nice. I think it's going to be a little bit overrated. I'm going to say that a lot. In general, a lot of cards tend to be overrated at the start of a format. A 3/3 for 3 is super solid. It's an easy C at an absolute bare minimum. Then it can attack with a little friend who becomes a big unkillable friend, which is very solid. However, this is going to have the similar problem that I have with Wintermoor Commander, another card that I think was overrated in Eldraine. I think people will think that this is always going to happen. I'm always going to be able to attack with a 4/4 indestructible. And they'll discount the times where your opponent just takes the 4/4 damage, blocks or double blocks or instant speed kills or whatever your Terran Iike, and sure, that 4 damage sucked that one time, but it's never going to happen again because Terran Iike is dead. So, don't get me wrong, I think she's really good. I think she's a solid B. I'll first pick her in a number of packs. Just be careful about thinking that you're going to be attacking with her with an indestructible 4/4 forever. Your opponent will have some thoughts about that. So B for Terran Iike, a Crowan Veteran. And remember as well, you have to have another creature, and it has to be less than a 4/4. You know, you don't want to be attacking with your 5/5 and turning it into a 4/4. Up next is Transcendent Envoy. Transcendent Envoy is 1 white for an enchantment creature, Griffin at common. It's a 1/2 flyer. Aura spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. So it's a 1/2 flyer for 2. I have learned to respect those stats. They're actually pretty darn okay, especially when they do something. And this one mildly does something. Yes, this is the Enchantment Matters set. Yes, there are a little bit more auras running around than normal, but there's not that many. Looking at white that we've reviewed today, there's only 5. And this isn't making Sentinels Eyes any cheaper. So there's only 4 that this matter on. Now, being able to cast your removal enchantments for like a single white mana or a 1 white mana, that's pretty darn good for your Banishing Light or your Hilliards Punishment. And if you're pairing this with green, there's a decent number of auras in green as well, that you'll probably get an okay amount of value off of this. I don't think it's crazy. I don't think it's insane. I think it's probably just in like the C+ range if you are aura heavy, which probably means white-green. And otherwise, you probably don't play this because a 1/2 flyer for 2 that doesn't do anything is like a C-. So deck dependent, C-, C+, depends on what you're doing for Transcendent Envoy. But our final card for today is Triumphant Surge. Triumphant Surge is 3 white for an instant at common. Destroy target creature with power 4 or greater. You gain 3 life. It's a strictly better Smite the Monstrous. I don't tend to like to main deck this card in most formats because it's dead a decent amount of the time. In this format, theoretically, people are going to be putting auras on things and they're going to hit that 4 power threshold pretty easily, but it's not always going to happen. You know, looking at the white set review, it hits precisely 1 creature prior to being aura'd or countered up, because of course, Heliod is indestructible. So I'm going to be cautious about main decking this at first. I think I'm probably just going to keep this in the sideboard just like I do with most formats, at least for the first week or 2. If it turns out the creatures are bigger, then this probably does jump up to like a C+, but I'm going to start this at a D+ instead. It's in my sideboard and it's going to be great when I pull it out of the sideboard after I've seen some really good targets for it, but I'm not going to do that until I see them first. So D+ for Triumphant Surge. So that's it for the white set review. White looks okay. It definitely looks weaker than some of the other colors, which I'm sure you've never heard that said about white before. But it's got cards I'm excited for. I'm excited to play Heliod. I'm excited to play Archon of Sun's Grace. And maybe I just kick back in this format and just play red-white aggro a whole bunch with the heroes. But let me know what you think of white and what cards you agree with and disagree with in the comments down below. As I said, this set review is definitely intended to be a jumping off point for discussions. It's not me telling you the correct answer. So chat with me, with each other in the comments down below. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions, you can always find me over on Twitter, Twitch, and Facebook. Over on twitch.tv/TheManaLeek on Wednesday, I will be playing Theros Sealed, starting at around 2:30 or 3 in the afternoon Eastern Standard Time on Magic Arena. Thank you very much to Wizards for inviting me to that early access event. You can always help me out over at patreon.com/themanaleak. Patrons are definitely the lifeblood of this channel. Becoming a Patreon backer means that you get access to the patrons only Discord. You'll also work your way towards getting a Mana Leak playmat when you hit $60 lifetime, regardless of how long that takes you. And you get a chance to get the cards out of the Pack 1 Pick Ones that I do each Tuesday, which will include 2 Theros collector boosters this season. And of course, the easiest way to help out is like, share, and subscribe. Emphasis on that share. But if you do have any questions, comments, or suggestions, let me know. Otherwise, I will see you all tomorrow for the blue set review.